Welcome to The Art of Show, where we feature the people who are creating amazing stories for kids. Join us as we chat with children's book illustrators and authors, storyboardists, animators, and more. Now, their art might be for kids, but aren't we all just kids at heart? Here's your host, Brandon.
All right, we want to welcome you guys back to The Art of Show. This is episode number 7. We are excited to be hanging out with you guys today. We've got a fun guest for you guys who has a really cool background and in terms of kids' books. So last week we had a visual development artist who has worked with Leica, with Jen Ely, but this week we're back into the kids' book arena. And you guys might have been wondering, last week we didn't have an episode because it was Thanksgiving, so happy belated Thanksgiving, happy early Christmas season. Hope you guys are having a blast. Me and my wife were up in Boston, Massachusetts, so I was away from my computer, so didn't get one out, but what was really cool is up in Boston, we got to see where Make Way for Ducklings, there's a Boston Commons, their park up there, they actually have a statue for Make Way for Ducklings, which won the Caldecott way back in the day, Robert McCloskey, I think I should say his last name. It was pretty cool to see that, and that book was all over the place, so definitely around kids' books, but just weren't putting out any interviews. So before we get into this interview, though, I want to let you guys know currently working on my next book, and I'd love to have you along for the process. I do things a little bit differently. I'm not straight up published by anybody, and so I do these just as a learning experience. And the biggest thing is I want to know what you guys like in books. And help you guys be part of the story. And so the way that I do that is you guys are kind of on a team that decides what happens next in the story. And so currently I have a book going right now about a little boy that wakes up in space and he has no clue why, and he's trying to figure out how to get back home. And I'd love to have you guys involved in that story. It's slated to come out probably early January, but if you guys want to check it out, if it goes to brandoncullum.com/space, that's CULLUMM like man.com/space, and you can join the team and we can have a lot of fun there. So let's get into the interview this week. We are chatting with Chris Robertson. Like I said, Chris has a little bit of different intro in terms of how he came to kids' books. Although I think his is kind of similar to a lot of the folks we've been talking with, in that he really had an illustration background and he worked in animation for a long time. So Nickelodeon was the big one that was in his story. He worked for Nick. There's a lot of cartoons I'm sure that you guys would recognize that he has worked on. He was a storyboard artist, did a lot of work with that, and then now he's actually working for Fox as an assistant. Let me make sure I get it right. An assistant director at Fox Animation, and so he's working on some shows for them there. But he brings that kind of Hanna-Barbera, that's the era that he grew up in, that style to his books. His latest that has just come out is called Giraffes Ruin Everything, which is really funny. And it's the giraffes do ruin everything, but he's got lots of great illustrations in it as well. He's got many that he's put out over the years, but we dive into Giraffes Ruin Everything as well as his background and how it influences his work. So without further ado, let's dive into the interview with Chris. As far as art and kids' books, was that something that was part of your story growing up? Like, were your parents artists, or kind of how did you kind of get into it?
My parents weren't necessarily artists. I always had a love of animated movies ever since I was really little. I was a big fan of Disney. One of my favorite feature films for quite a long time was The Jungle Book.
Yeah.
But I was a big fan of Disney, big fan of Warner Brothers cartoons. Loved the Bugs Bunny cartoons, Daffy Duck cartoons. A big fan of the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, like Yogi Bear and Huckleberry Hound, that era.
Yeah.
And it probably shows up in my illustration work too, whether I'm aware of it. I'm aware of it now because I've had a lot of people respond, "Oh, you look like you kind of have that UPN type of look to your work." And I really wasn't aware of it, but all of that work all of the work that I admired when I was a kid, like especially the cartoons, kind of has seeped into my illustration work. Almost like unconsciously almost, or subconsciously.
Gotcha. That's real cool. So did you go to school for illustration?
I didn't go to an art school, but I
Okay.
did go to Cal State Northridge, and I majored in art and painting.
Okay.
And but more importantly, I was a kid who always loved to draw,
Yeah.
and it stayed with me. I think most kids, when they're little, they either have a parent or a teacher or someone who they look up to, and they tell the young person, "Oh, that doesn't really look like a tree all that much," or "That doesn't quite look like a car or that person." And kids who love to draw at a very early age stop drawing.
Yeah.
And I think there's a reason they stop drawing is because they're either being told that they're doing it wrong, or they're told that, or their grades, like if a kid doesn't stay within the lines, the kid doesn't understand drawing or doesn't understand coloring, and that type of influence probably pushes kids away from art from a very early age, whether the teachers are aware of it or not. Now, I was a kid that I really loved to draw, and regardless of what anybody said to me on a negative side, I always loved to do it, and so it stuck with me. So I'm more of a byproduct of I'm an artist that has always done it,
Mm-hmm.
who's always drawn and always painted. So although I went to Cal State Northridge, my work doesn't necessarily reflect, oh yeah, I can see that there's a Cal State Northridge influence there, or anything like that. It's more like I always had a passion for it, and it has stayed, and I've been lucky, and it has stayed with me my entire life.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was looking through. I know you had mentioned that you work for Fox currently, but I was looking through, and it sounds like you were with Disney as well as Nickelodeon way back in the day. Is that right?
I worked for Disney just freelance.
Okay, just freelance. Gotcha.
I did a little bit of stuff for Phineas and Ferb. The guy that sold the show to Disney, his name is Dan Povenmire, and I used to work with him on Family Guy and Hey Arnold.
Okay.
And I worked a little bit on the pilot of Phineas and Ferb, and I did some concept art for the show Recess, and a couple other things for Disney. But most of the time was spent in my early animation years, from 1995 to about 2002. I spent at Nickelodeon, where I worked on Hey Arnold.
Yep.
And Fairly Odd Parents, and a little bit on Angry Beavers, a little bit on Cat Dog, and I helped develop the show Oswald the Octopus.
Okay, cool.
Which was inspired by a book by Dan Yacanero. I think that's how you pronounce his name.
Yeah, I actually had
the famous children's book author and illustrator.
Yeah, I actually had Dan on the podcast a couple weeks ago, and we talked about Oswald a little bit. So that's cool. It's like kind of the full circle.
Unfortunately, I didn't have an opportunity to work on the actual show itself, but I did work on the pilot, storyboarding the pilot,
Gotcha.
which was a lot of fun.
Gotcha.
So,
showing my age a little bit, when I was reading through, I saw especially Hey Arnold, I was like, oh man, that brings back lots of memories. So those were definitely loved watching those shows way back in the day. So as a storyboard artist, for those that may not know, were you an animation director as well? Is that?
I was an animation director at Nickelodeon.
Okay.
And I'm an assistant director at Fox right now
Gotcha.
on American Dad.
Okay.
So
how did that
kind
of?
American Dad really isn't for kids, so it's not something I tend to, like, if I do school events.
Yeah,
or
you're not talking about Family Guy or
events.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like I get up in front of the kids and say, "Okay, I work for Fox TV and I draw pictures for American Dad and Family Guy." How do you kids know that?
Yeah.
Most 2-year-olds don't raise their hand.
Yeah.
At that point,
Some
do, but not all of them. Thank goodness.
Now, were kids' books, were they in the back of your mind during this period, or did they kind of come out of the work you're already doing naturally?
It kind of was a natural progression and evolution, I think. It was, I started my art career after college doing some illustration work, mostly for magazines and newspapers.
Uh-huh.
And I did that for about 7 or 8 years. And then I segued into animation. Economically, it made more sense. It just seemed to offer a greater ceiling of growth at that time. And so I segued into animation in 1995, and I've been in animation for the past 20 years. But since I was been in animation, I've always, ever since I was little, I had a fascination with children's books, not just reading them, but writing and illustrating them. So it wasn't just because I got into animation, or it wasn't just because I was doing illustration work after college, but it was kind of an accumulation of all those things because of my fascination with children's books and being an illustrator and then getting into animation. Once I got into animation, I kind of understood, and doing storyboards, I kind of understood visual storytelling much better than I ever had just being an illustrator. And so at that point, it started to make sense. Hey, I could do a picture book. And I started to come up with ideas for picture books. And Little Miss Liberty was one of the first ideas I had for a picture book. And I was lucky enough to get published by Chronicle Books with Little Miss Liberty.
Gotcha.
In 2005.
What were some of the differences between, I mean, I'm sure there's lots, but between storyboarding and then the storytelling inside of a picture book?
Well, storyboarding, of course, is expansive. It's a huge number of drawings, a huge number of scenes, a large number of characters. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of drawings that tell either an 11-minute episode, the story of an 11-minute episode, or a 22-minute episode. It's hundreds and hundreds of drawings. What a picture book is, it's kind of like a storyboard, only a very brief one. And you have to pick the best moments of that quote-unquote storyboard that kind of that tells the story the best way visually. So storyboarding was to me, key in learning the ins and outs of maybe what would make a great picture book. But it's also with storyboarding, you tend to kind of go, okay, I'm going to illustrate what the words are. I'm going to illustrate what's happening. I'm illustrating what's happening with the words, and I'm going to go along with the dialogue, and so it all syncs up. Mm-hmm. Picture books, on the other hand, you want to illustrate things that aren't necessarily in the text. So you kind of have to find your own voice, your own language, your own thing. So the main thing about storyboarding, it's hundreds and hundreds of drawings. Where picture books, you don't have that luxury. It's not going to be hundreds and hundreds. A graphic novel would be hundreds and hundreds, but not a picture book. You don't want to bore your audience. So you just want to illustrate, find the key points of the story, but also tell a slightly different story than the words tell in a picture book.
Yeah, what was it like then? Because I imagine working in television, the process is pretty collaborative. Versus, did you write and illustrate your first Little Miss Liberty? Yes,
I wrote and illustrated it.
So
what submitted it to several publishers, and I was lucky to have Chronicle say yes to it. So.
Gotcha. So what was it like then? Because I'd imagine that's a little bit more of a solo project outside of like art directors and everything. But what was that process where it's kind of like your own world that you're building and your own story that you're building versus working in TV and animation?
Animation prepares you for the collaborative effort that you're going to have. And it's such a collaborative effort. You're working with so many people on a project. Yeah. And you're getting notes all the time. You're getting revisions and notes and changes. That your first pass on something is never, I can't say never, but rarely the way it turns out when it's actually finished and up there on the screen, whether it's a TV screen or a movie screen.
Gotcha.
So you're so used to so many notes, and so it's so collaborative. A picture book is collaborative, but animation prepares you for the worst. So in my experience with picture books, even when the art director gives me notes, it's nothing compared to the notes that I get in animation. Mm. So it's like, oh, we're going to change this, and we have an idea for this and this. And I get those notes, and it's like, oh, that's it? Oh, I thought it was going to be extensive.
Yeah.
And it's usually not. It's usually not that many changes. But they come from a completely different world. Maybe they're used to illustrators who are a little more tied to their work, or you do a rough sketch and it's like, that's what I see for the cover. It's going to be perfect. Where I come from, the animation world, where we do maybe, for a different scene, we act it out, and we act out what the characters are going to be doing, and we do it several different ways and different times. So I come from a place where it's like you do something over and over and over until you settle on what you may feel be not necessarily the right way, but the right way at the time.
Gotcha.
For the majority of the people.
That makes a ton of sense. So with Giraffes Ruin Everything, I know that came out. Was that in August? Is that right?
That came out August 16th of this year. Yeah.
Okay, just a couple of months ago, and that one was by Heidi Schultz.
Heidi Schultz, yeah.
Okay. So how does the process work then when you're coming to it and it's not a story? How does that kind of process work?
That actually was, that process is very similar to my animation experience, because in my animation experience, I get a script.
Right.
That is not written by me. It is a script that's written by a writer or a group of writers at work. And then me and my director get it, and we look it over, and then we start to do our thumbnails, and we start to board it, and we start to build it very slowly until like 5 or 6 weeks later, it is an actual storyboard that we can show to the executives. Well, in this process, I got a script, or a manuscript, as it were. And so it was similar in a way that, okay, now I have to, break apart and storyboard and this script or manuscript. And that's kind of where, my approach was very similar. Just because it was a project that I had not written, it still was something that I'm accustomed to.
Gotcha.
That I'm taking words that, I didn't write them, but I can still work from them. More than anything, it has to be a project that you at least relate to on some level. It can't just be like, this will be a good paycheck. It can't be from that. It has to be like, I find this manuscript amusing. It reminds me of the time when I was so-and-so. There has to be some relationship to it if you're going to connect with the material.
What was it about Giraffes Ruin Everything that drew you to that story?
I think the humor. I think it was a bit odd. It was a challenge to illustrate, because the child in the book, the narrator, doesn't like giraffes. And he was telling the audience basically how despicable they are.
Yeah.
Sorry. How despicable they are because, they'll ruin a birthday party, or they'll ruin your adventure to the movies, or they'll ruin this, they'll ruin that. So at the same time, while the character was saying how much they were going to ruin things, it was my job to illustrate that the giraffe was not actually ruining things. He was just being a sweet, innocent animal that happened to be a little clumsy. So I had to show in the pictures something that was actually different than what the words were saying. The words were saying, "Don't invite a giraffe because they'll ruin everything." I had to show, this giraffe is just a little clumsy. He's a little awkward. He's gawky. He's shy, and so it was a little tricky from that standpoint. So it was a bit of a challenge. And I think I did a pretty good job with it. I think I succeeded in showing both, where you can kind of like show the point of view of the narrator, but also when the reader is reading it, you can kind of go, that giraffe's not so bad.
Yeah.
He's just silly. He's just being a silly giraffe.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a challenge to cross that line of kind of doing, of addressing both worlds.
So when you are writing and illustrating your own books, are you starting with the story first, or is it a picture that will grab you, or does it depend on the project?
I'd like to say that because I'm an artist first and a writer second, that it's always the picture that grabs me first.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you the truth, because I've been in animation for so long and we work from a script, that if I work on something, I will write it first. And there might be, while I'm writing it, I will do like a little thumbnail sketch maybe of a scene or of a spread or a spot illustration. But I won't. Little Miss Liberty, I did some drawings, some concept drawings of her before I even had the story. I just thought it would be a fun project to draw the Statue of Liberty as a little girl and make her a real person. And so that book probably started off with a preliminary sketch, but it's not like I did tons of concept art before I started working on the story. That one, but I remember while I was at Nickelodeon, I would, sit there in between projects or storyboards of Hey Arnold. I would sit there and sketch little drawings of the Statue of Liberty as a little girl. And that's how that kind of story started.
Gotcha.
But most of the time, I work with the words first.
So those ideas, are they just kind of coming out of all different places? And kind of how do you
know?
Yeah,
Brandon, ideas. They just come from all sorts of places. I'm inspired by so many different things. Mainly, I'm inspired right now because, like I mentioned earlier, my 5-year-old son, and he's in the picture book. He's my demographic right now.
Yeah,
he's the kid we're reading 2 or 3 picture books a night to.
Yeah,
and so I've never been more interested in the work that I'm doing as a picture book creator than I am right now, because he's at the perfect age where he's able to actually benefit from it and enjoy it, and see that his dad is creating picture books too. So that's a big inspiration for me. But I look at other picture books. This morning I went to Claire Keene's book launch for Little Big Girl.
Yeah.
And met with her and talked to her briefly. And I've been a fan of hers for years when she was a Disney artist, and her father's a very influential Disney artist, Glenn Keane. And he was the one that was behind Tarzan and Beauty and the Beast, and among other films. And so it was really nice just to meet with her and talk to her. And so it's not only important for me to create books that are going to do well and kids will like and laugh from, but it's also, I'm a huge fan of the art form. I love buying picture books, and I love going to the events where the authors or the illustrators are there, and we can, if I get a chance to just chat with them briefly, that'd be great. But I'm a huge fan. So like every month I probably buy 3, 4, 5, 10 picture books.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of an addict.
Yeah. Now,
and as long as we have room in the house, I'm going to continue to do it.
That's awesome. Now, with your son, you said he's 5, is that right?
Yes.
With him being in kind of that prime age, has that changed how you approach your current work, since you've got someone right there that you can kind of think through his eyes?
I think, well, right now he's not only at a great age, 5 years old, but he's great because he understands what I do for a living. He not only understands that I go to work and I draw pictures for a TV show, but he understands that I draw pictures and write for picture books. So he right now is all into making his own picture books. So he creates one, like he did one this morning called The Giraffe.
That's awesome.
And he draws this little picture of a giraffe on the cover. And when we're doing these really quick versions of books, he'll take like 10 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper, and we staple them together, and he'll draw on the paper and then turn the paper, and since he's in kindergarten, he's doing his best writing. He's in kindergarten, so he's not he needs a lot of help, but it's a lot of fun because he's creating books himself.
Yeah.
And it's important to him. It's really fun to see that he's enjoying it and he has ideas. One of his first ones was just these little square Post-its, and he wanted me to staple about 8 of the little Post-its together, and he called it the Little Book.
That's fun.
And I'm like, that's as good an idea as any.
Yeah.
And it was so cute that when he wanted to figure out where to put this book, we went over to the bookshelf that he has in his room that has literally hundreds of picture books, And we were like, let's put her right here, right between Little Miss Liberty and Giraffes Ruin Everything.
That's cool. That's really
right
cool.
under the Robertson section.
Yeah. Now, do you read your books to him?
It's not something that I'll read the book to him, but what we usually do at nighttime, if we do 3 books, he picks a book, I pick a book, and my wife picks a book.
Okay, cool.
And so I typically don't go here. I don't usually push it on him. Here, we got to do Little Miss Liberty tonight. Let's do Little Miss Liberty. We haven't read Little Miss Liberty in 2 days. We got to read it again. I usually don't do that. If he goes to Giraffes Ruin Everything or the newer one from Sterling called Where Do Pants Go, then that's great. But I try not to push it on him that we have enough books to pick from, and I want his taste to be authentic and diverse.
That's good. That's real good. Well, as we're kind of wrapping up, there's a couple questions I'd love to ask everyone we have on. And this one's kind of a two-parter. The first is if you had a favorite book growing up. And the second, since you have a kid right in that age, or even your other kids, did they have a favorite book growing up? You kind of had to hide because you got tired of reading it.
Well, I would have to say, I'll answer my favorite picture books first. I had so many that, and I remember when I was reading them, I was so enamored by the illustrations. I would just stare at the illustrations, it seemed like, for hours, and it would take me a long time to read either a picture book or a chapter book, because I would just stare at the illustrations. If I was looking at Stuart Little, I would just stare at the illustrations by Garth Williams. I would just stare at them, and I kind of like stare at them and wonder, but also be fascinated by them. And I loved like Charlotte's Web and Stuart Little when I was a little older. But when I was little, I loved Harry the Dirty Dog by Gene Zion, and the pictures were by Margaret Bloy Graham, and I love the simple color palette that those early books, like the books from the 60s, had. Harry the Dirty Dog, I think, was printed only in black, green, and yellow. And so it had a very limited color palette. And I think that has bled over to and inspired some of my own work. I like to keep it a relatively simple color palette on some, not too colorful, not too crazy with the color, kind of keep it more, where the focus, like on Little Miss Liberty, she was that, I think it's a patina green, but she was the focus on every spread, and then everything else was almost like a secondary color.
Gotcha.
And she was the main focus, and so the giraffe too. The giraffe, of course, was yellow and had the orange spots, and he was the centerpiece of every illustration. Everything else was kind of secondary. Other books that I loved, Curious George by H.A. Rey, and I loved Curious George and the simplicity of the illustrations, the amount of fun that those illustrations, and Veronica by Roger Devosian. That look, I love that look, and work by Don Freeman, like Fly High, Fly Low.
Yeah.
The work of Bernard Weber, Lila Crocodile, loved it. And I look at all that work now, and I can see little bits and pieces of their work in my own work. And especially the newest book that I'm working on, the art is due at the end of November. It's a book for Simon & Schuster, and it's a book called If I Didn't Have You, and it's written by a gentleman named Alan Katz. And most of his books were illustrated by David Catro, and most of them had human characters. And so I asked the art director, would it be a good idea, or would it be an okay idea if I did animals for this book, because typically Alan Katz's books don't have animals? And he said, yeah, what do you have in mind? And I came up with the crocodile family. And a lot of that was inspired by just the look of Lila Crocodile. Yeah. Because I love that story. And so that's kind of like my inspiration, the books I loved when I was a kid. The books that my son loves right now, there hasn't been a book that that he's asked for more than Creepy Carrots by Aaron Reynolds and illustrated by Peter Brown.
Yeah.
That one probably comes out at least once a week and continues to.
Yeah.
It's one that we all love, and I think Peter Brown and both Aaron Reynolds and Peter Brown did a great job. But I'm a huge fan of Peter Brown. I think everything he touches is gold. And another book that we all love as a family is Gaston by Kelly DiPuccio, and the pictures were done by Christian Robinson.
Yeah.
His name is awfully close to mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've received some Twitter tweets, posts that were intended for him, because I'm Books by Chris R. on Twitter, and he doesn't have a Twitter account. So I've occasionally received like, "Hey, great job on the school's first day of school," and I had to write back, "Oh, thank you very much," but I had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
So, but I love Gaston, and again, another Peter Brown book, My Teacher is a Monster. That one seems to come up pretty often. I don't know if you're familiar with a woman named Catherine Rayner.
No.
She's British, but she does. Look her up. We have most of her catalog, and there's a book called Abigail about a lanky giraffe. That's just wonderful. And look her work up. I think you'd be very pleasantly surprised at her work. And when we're reading books, I usually try to read a Jim LaMarche book once in a while. We just got his newest Pond, which is gorgeous.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite books of his is The Raft. And books.
Yeah, lots
I
of
can't
books.
get enough of them.
That's awesome. I just
No, thank you.
saw Catherine's website. Yeah, her illustrations are really cool.
The illustrations are amazing. They're just, and I love how loose and spontaneous they are, and just how inventive and creative, and they're just magnificent. And her storytelling, very simple but real sweet.
Yeah.
Cool. I think the Moose one is really good too. I think it's Ernest the Moose. Look up that. Get that one. That one's just a lot of fun.
Gotcha. I'll do it. Well, as we're wrapping up, what's the best way folks can keep up with you and the new books that sounds like you have coming out next year?
Yeah, I have the Tickle book coming out. It's a little golden book.
Okay.
It's coming out in May of next year. It's Random House, Little Golden Books. And then in 2018, I have one from Simon & Schuster called If I Didn't Have You, written by Alan Katz. And I don't know exactly when that one's going to come out, but 2018. But my most recent ones are, of course, Giraffes Ruin Everything, and that came out in August. And that's from Bloomsbury Publishing.
Okay.
And then the one that came out in September is Where Do Pants Go?, written by Rebecca Van Slyke. And then I've done a couple other ones that we haven't mentioned, but they're with a smaller press. I'll mention them. One is called My Yellow Umbrella.
Okay.
Written and illustrated by me, and Harry and the Hot Lava, written and illustrated by me, for all the kids who love playing the Hot Lava game.
Yes, I love that game.
So it's but yeah, these are all available on Amazon, certainly, and most children's bookstores, but Amazon for sure.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate your time, and it's great to see the work that you're putting out there, and also it's really cool to hear just your background as far as what you're inspired by, and just know you've got a super busy day job, but you make time for putting pretty amazing books out there too. So thank you so much for that.
Well, it's really important to me, and I think if anything's important to you, you'll find time to do it, and it's really important to me. So.
Well, I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I appreciate your time. And I look forward to reading your next books as they come out.
Thank you very much, Brandon.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Hey guys, before you go, if you like what I'm getting to do here, having these amazing conversations with amazing people, the number one way that you can help support The Art of Show is by leaving a rating and review on iTunes. And if you go to Brandon Cullum, CULLUMM like man.com /review,
They'll take you right to iTunes, and I'll let you leave it there. That helps support what I'm doing, as well as let other folks know about it, and I would greatly appreciate it. So until next time, I'll talk to you soon.